Welcome to part 8 of this YSL tutorial on Excel VBA user forms. This video is going to explain how to use option buttons, which are fairly simple tools, so the video is not going to be that long. We're going to start by showing you how to draw option buttons on the form, and then how you can organise them into groups by either assigning a group name to them or by drawing them inside frames. We'll talk about the click event, which is how you can detect when the option has been selected, and also how you can assign a default option to a group. Towards the end of the video we'll cover a slightly more complex example, just to maybe give you a flavour of some more real-world uses than the basic example we'll start with. So not too much to do, shouldn't take too long, let's get started. Before we start using option buttons to do anything useful, it's important to understand how they're grouped together by default. So to demonstrate the principle, let's give ourselves a bit of extra space on the form, and we're going to draw in there a set of about 4 different option buttons. Simplest thing to do here is double click the option button tool on the toolbox to lock that to the cursor, and then just click 4 times to draw 4 separate option buttons. Let's go back to the select objects cursor, and then we'll run the form and demonstrate how that works. If I click on the background of the form and run it, by default, all the option buttons will be unselected. If I click on any single one, that will select it. Now if I select any other option, because all these option buttons are part of the same group, the currently selected one will be unselected. So you can only have one of your options selected by default, and that's simply because all the option buttons are part of the same group. Now one way to change the default grouping of option buttons is to assign a group name. So to do that, let's close the form down and head back to the Visual Basic Editor. And I'd like to assign a group name to option button 1 and 2. So I can do that either one by one or grouped together. So let's select option button 1 and 2. And then we can find in the properties window the group name property. Let's create an inventive group name. Let's call it group 1. So option button 1 and 2 belong to one group, option button 3 and 4 belong to the default group. So if I were to run the form again now, I'll find that I can have one option from the first group selected and a different option from the second group selected. So choosing between options 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 work completely separately. If I were to add any more option buttons to the form, they'd belong again, of course, to the default group. So if I drew another option button, that would belong to the default group. It will have no group name. So again, running the form will show me that I can select any of these 3 plus any one of these 2. Another way to group option buttons together is to draw them inside a frame. So I'm going to draw another set of option buttons inside my film genres frame. I'll draw 4 this time, and then if I go back to the select objects cursor and then choose to run the form, I'll find that I can select any one of the 4 option buttons within the frame without having to assign them to a group, as well as any one of these 3 and any one of these 2. You can even assign buttons to groups within a frame, so I can have, if I go back to the design view, I could have option buttons 6 and 7, if I select them both, inside a group, which I'll inventively call group 2. So now, if I go back and run the form again, I'll find that I can select any one of these 2 inside the frame, plus any one of these 2 inside the frame, plus any one of these 3, plus any one of these 2. So those are all your options for grouping option buttons. You can assign group names to them, and you can draw them inside frames to control what groups they belong to. To demonstrate how to use option buttons in a practical context, we're going to replace our 2 command buttons that allow us to switch between the different rating systems for film certificates. So you may remember from a previous video, we've got the option to select from the BBFC rating system or the MPAA rating system by clicking between these 2 separate buttons. What we're going to do is replace those with a pair of option buttons instead. So to start with, what we'll do is delete all the additional buttons we've added in just to demonstrate the basics. So if we go back to the design view of the form, we can select and then delete all of those buttons, and then we can get to the job of replacing our command buttons as well. Just before we delete the command buttons, it's worth remembering that there is some code stored behind the click event of both buttons. To see it, if I just double click on one of the 2 buttons, it is a click event of the Use UK Ratings and the click event of the Use US Ratings buttons. So they clear the existing list of certificates and then replace the list with a reference to a new range of cells. So essentially our option buttons are going to achieve exactly the same results as this. What we're going to do, in fact, to make life a lot easier, we could replace the command buttons with option buttons with exactly the same names, so Use UK Ratings and Use US Ratings. So back into the object view or the design view of the form, we can select and delete those 2 command buttons, and then what we can do is replace them with 2 option buttons. So the first one, I'm going to change its name so that it's called Use UK Ratings, and then the second one, that I'm going to draw. If I just make the first one a little bit shorter, we can call this one Use US Ratings. We should give them sensible captions as well. So I'm going to change the caption of this one so it says MPAA, which is the American rating system, and then the second one, or the first one I suppose, is the caption should be BBFC. Just want to make the MPAA one a little bit shorter as well, so just a quick little bit of manoeuvring, and then we should find that based on the code that we've already added in earlier on, the click event of these two option buttons should just work as normal. So if I were to run the form and then look in the list to begin with, it uses the BBFC ratings. If I choose MPAA, then it will change to the MPAA ratings. So the click event of option buttons works in the same way pretty much as click events of command buttons. Now you may have noticed that when we first displayed the form, neither of the two option buttons were selected. That's simply because the default value for an option button is false. So it'd be sensible, I think, in this case to set the BBFC rating option button to be the default one, so set its value to be true when the form first loads. And we can do that using the initialize event of the form. So if I close the form down and then head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we want to see the code view of the form, so I'm just going to quickly double click on its background. That takes me to the initialize event, and we've already got added in code here that sets the list properties of the certificate drop-down list, the combo box, and the film genres list box. All we're going to do is add a single line of code that makes the value of the Use UK Ratings option button set its value to be equal to true. It genuinely is that simple. So if I then head back to Excel and choose to show the form on screen, we'll find this time that the BBFC ratings button has already been selected. Now that really is pretty much all there is to know about option buttons. You know that they exist in groups, they have a value which can be either true or false, and they have a click event which you can use to detect when they've been selected. But it'd be a pretty short video if we just left it at that, so we will create one more example in this video, a slightly more complex one, but hopefully a little bit more fun to create as well. What we're going to do is allow the user to see an exchange rate for the film's gross value. So when they enter the gross in US dollars, we're going to have another section on the form that allows them to convert that into different currencies. So I'll have maybe 3 different option buttons for 3 different currencies, and we'll update a text box which shows the final answer. The key to making this system work is having some sort of table in which we can look up the various different currency exchange rates. Now we could take the simple approach and just create a basic static table in which we just type in the list of currency exchange rates. So for instance, we could look up on a website and then just type in a range of values. So there's nothing special about these numbers here at all, they're just typed in from the most recent time I looked up the values on a website. But I thought it'd be a bit more fun if we could create a query to a website that we can continually update to retrieve the most recent values. So rather than using the static table, what we're going to do is create a basic web query. So I've created a new worksheet for this, and I'm going to rename it so it's called something simple like exchange rates. And then what I need to do to create a web query is identify some sort of website that contains a table of data that I can easily link to. Now, I've done a little bit of preparatory work here, so I've just been to Google and searched for exchange rate table, and I've found a suitable website that has a list of a few different tables actually on this page. But there's one here that contains the top 10 currencies, and it's got euros, British pounds, and I'm also going to use Japanese yen just as a quick example. So we're going to use this table and import that into our workbook. So to make that work, if I switch back into Excel, we can use the Data tab in the ribbon and then choose the option there, the second button along, from Web. The important thing here is that you have a URL that you can browse to. This is a really basic web browser that's nested inside Excel that you can use to browse to websites. The idea here is that you're looking for these little yellow box symbols with the black arrows in them so that you can select a table to import into Excel. So I'm just going to go back quickly to Google and copy that URL and then head back to my Excel workbook, and then I'll paste that URL into the address bar and choose to go to it. So you should see that web page loads in this browser. It'll look a little bit messed up. If you get messages about debugging web pages, we definitely don't want to try to start debugging web pages. You may get a few messages about scripts not being able to run. You can just cancel out of all those as well. But what we're looking for now is any of these little yellow boxes with the black arrows in them, and we should find one, hopefully, nested at the top left-hand corner of that top 10 rates table. There's another one a bit further down actually that shows an alphabetic list of lots more currencies, so we could go for a slightly wider range if we needed it. But for this example, I just want to get the top 10. So I can highlight that table. You can highlight more than one as well, by the way, if you want to bring in more than one table, but I only want this first one. So with that one selected, I'm then going to click the Import tool, and that will launch a little dialog box asking me where I want to put the data. So I'm going to stick it on the worksheet I've just created, exchange rates. We can modify some properties of this query a little bit later on, so I'm not going to change those right now. But all I'm going to do is stick it at the top left-hand corner, cell A1. If I click OK, what should happen is all the data from that table will be retrieved in a query and sit in a bunch of Excel cells. Okay, so just a couple of quick simple things we can do with this data range. Should we ever need to refresh it manually, we can right click on any cell in the range and choose to refresh it, and that will load the most recent data from the website. Oh, there we go, it's updated. We can also choose to make that happen automatically, either on a timed basis or when we choose to open up the workbook. So if I right click again on any cell in the data range, I can choose data range properties, and in the dialog box I can choose to update it or refresh it every so many minutes, or refresh it when the file opens. So that's those are the basic options you've got. I'm not going to change any of those options right now. I'm going to rely on manual updating for the table. I'm just going to hit cancel in that case. One more thing you can do as well, if you decide that you need to change which set of data you're querying, you can right click on any cell and choose edit query. Now in this case what that will do is relaunch the web browser tool, which is going to show me all those silly messages about scripts not working. So I'm not going to choose that option, but should you need to modify the table or the query, or choose a different table on the site, you can choose edit query. Alternatively, you could of course just delete the entire worksheet and create a new one. So those are the basics of the web query tool. So the next step is to head back to the Visual Basic Editor and design the section of controls that allow us to calculate the exchange rate. So back into the VBA Editor, we're going to have a new section on the form, so I'll make the form a bit wider, it's getting a bit busy now. We're going to add a new frame first of all, so we can easily group our option buttons together. I'm going to change the name of the frame so that it's called something like Exchange Frame. Sounds like a sensible name. So in the Properties window, we can call this Exchange Frame. And then we'll change its caption as well, so it's something to do with exchange rates. Let's call it currency exchange. What we can then do is draw a set of controls inside the frame. So I'm going to start by adding 3 labels, then 3 text boxes, then 3 option buttons. So the 3 labels first of all, if I double click the label tool, that will make it easier to draw several labels fairly quickly. Then the same for text boxes, and then the same for 3 option buttons as well. Now the option buttons don't need to be sitting alongside the text boxes. I'm choosing 3 option buttons because we're going to have 3 different currencies, so it doesn't really matter too much where these go. Let me just drop them in down towards the bottom there. Okay, so the names for these objects, the labels first of all, let's call this exchange dollars label. Sorry, spell exchange properly first. This is the tedious, boring bit, apologies for this. Exchange dollars label. The caption of that will be dollar amount, something along those lines. The next label will be exchange rate label, and then the caption will be something similar, exchange rate. The third label is going to be exchange amount label, and then the caption will be something like exchange amount. Names of the text boxes, and just increase the width of that label a little bit. Names of the text boxes, the top one will be exchange dollars. So this will represent the original amount in dollars, so we'll represent this, we'll essentially just transfer the value from the film gross text box into the dollar amount text box, or the exchange dollars text box. The next one will be exchange rate, and the third one will be exchange amount. Okay, nearly there. Just the 3 option buttons to deal with now. So the first option button, I'm going to show the amount in, well, let's go for UK pounds. So I'm going to say use UK pounds. That'll be the name of the first option button. His caption will say British pounds. I'm being very careful actually, by the way, just to mention with the captions of these option buttons. I want to make sure that the captions of the option buttons are the same as the names of the currencies in the table. So actually I've made a small mistake there. It's British pound, not pounds. This is to make it slightly easier to do the lookup a little bit later on. So I'm doing a little bit of work prior to writing the code here. So British pound, then we'll have euro, and we'll have Japanese yen as well. So I just need to modify that caption a little bit so it's British pound rather than pounds. Then the next one we'll call this option button use euro, and then its caption will simply be euro. And then for the third option button, we'll call this one use yen, and then the caption of the option button will be Japanese yen. So those match the names of the currencies in the worksheet. Okay, that's the long, boring, tedious part done. Now we can get to adding some code so that when we choose one of these options, all these text boxes update automatically to show us the correct values. Now we only want something to happen here when the user clicks on one of these three option buttons. So we're going to use the click event of each option button to update the values of these text boxes. So let's start with the British pounds one. If I double click on that, that will launch the click event, or give me the click event handler for that specific option button. While I'm here, I might as well generate the click event handlers for the other two option buttons, because they're all going to do essentially the same thing. So let's find the use euro option button, and then finally as well the use yen option button. Now, somewhat annoyingly, these get added in alphabetic order of the subroutine names, so there's no harm whatsoever in moving these around just to reorganise your code. So I'm going to select my use UK pounds one and move it down towards the bottom, just down to where the use yen example is, and then get rid of a couple of these blank lines, then do the same thing for the use euro example. So find that one and then cut that from where it is, and then paste it down towards the bottom. Okay, so that just makes it slightly easier to deal with that section of code. All these three click events are actually going to do essentially the same thing, just using slightly different values. So rather than rewrite the same code in three different procedures, we're going to create a separate subroutine altogether, which does all the hard work. So I'm going to create this new subroutine just below all the click event handlers for these option buttons to give myself a little bit of extra space so we can see more clearly what I'm doing. I'm going to create a private sub, which I'm going to call calculate exchange. What I'd like to be able to do with this procedure as well is pass into it the option button that I've just clicked on. So I'm going to declare a parameter called currency option, and its type will be an msforms.option button. So I'm going to pass a reference to the entire object rather than just a single piece of data. That makes it slightly easy to do certain things in terms of validation later on. Okay, so the basic principle behind what I want to do here is when the user selects one of the option buttons, I want to take the caption of that option button and find it in my list of exchange rates. Then I'd like to return the value from the column immediately next door to it, so the one column to the right. So if I select British pound, I want to find that name in the list, return that value. So to make that work, what we can do is this. Well, let's declare a variable that can hold a reference to a range object, so dim r as range. What I then want to do is set r to be equal to the result of a cell that I find. I want to look for that on my exchange rates worksheet. Let's give that a slightly more sensible code name first of all. Sheet 1 is a bit poor, so let's call it something like WS exchange rates. So what we can then do is say set r equals WS exchange rates dot columns A. I don't really need to search in the entirety of column A, it's just quicker and easier to do things this way. I could refer to just the range of populated cells in column A. So range A1 to range A1 to the next cell down. We've seen that many times across the various different VBA tutorials we've done. So I'll keep things simple for now. Columns A dot find, and then the value that I would like to find is the caption of the currency option button that I've passed in. So I can say here currency option dot caption. This is why it was so important earlier on to make sure that we matched the caption text with the actual names of the currencies as they appear in the worksheet. Okay, so that can result in one of two things happening. As long as I've spelt everything correctly, then that will result in the r variable holding a reference to the cell that I wanted to find. The problem is that I might not have found the currency I was looking for. It could be the case that maybe the website has been updated and the currency exchange or the currency names have changed, or maybe I've misspelt my caption on my label. So just to make sure that we're not trying to do something if we haven't found a value, we're going to add a quick if statement that's going to say if not r is nothing, then. So if we don't find what we were looking for, then the r variable will contain nothing. So assuming that we have found a cell containing the name of the currency, we want to update the three text boxes that we created. So they were exchange dollars, first of all. So we'll say exchange dollars.value is equal to film gross dot value. So that just retrieves the same value that the user has typed in into the other text box. Then the exchange rate, this is the important thing, exchange rate dot value will be equal to the value of the cell that is offset one column to the right of whatever cell we're referencing with our r variable. So r.offset 0,1 value. The exchange amount is fairly trivial then. Exchange amount is simply multiplying the exchange dollars value by the exchange rate value. So exchange amount.value equals exchange dollars.value multiplied by exchange rate.value. Now all we have to do is call this procedure in each of the click events of the three option buttons. So we can write a quick simple line of code. Again, the call keyword is optional. I think I keep on mentioning this every time I use it. But I'm going to say call calculate exchange, and I want to pass in a reference to the option button that I've just clicked. So that the option button I've just clicked, in that case, will be use euro. If you're using the call keyword, just the one difference is that you must wrap up the argument list in parentheses there. So if I'm using call, I must use parentheses. If you're not using call, then don't use parentheses. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste that, basically, just to make life a little bit easier. And here I'm going to say, rather than use euro, that would be use UK pounds. That would be the name of the option button. And then again, for the use yen, I want to say call that procedure, but passing in a reference to the use yen option button instead. So that's the basics of the system set up. We should just give this one a quick test now by heading back into Excel and seeing what happens. So let's head back to Excel and we'll head to our menu sheet and launch the form. And then let's type in some sort of number, so 731 million. And then if we were to choose any of these three options, we should find that the exchange rate is calculated automatically. So we can switch between them and everything just works neatly. Now there are one or two small potential problems with the way the system works at the moment. First of all, with these things just being text boxes, there's nothing to stop the user overtyping these with whatever they want. It doesn't even have to be numbers, it can be any value whatsoever. It doesn't really matter in the long run because when the user clicks one of the other option buttons, our code ensures that the correct values are transferred across. But it seems silly to allow the user to be able to type into those boxes, so let's prevent them from doing that first of all. If I close down the form and then head back to the design view in the Visual Basic editor, there are two ways you can stop people from typing into a text box. There are two properties. There's a locked property and an enabled property. So let me just really quickly show you what the enabled property does. So for each of these text boxes, if I select all three at once, we can change their enabled property from true to false. So what that will do, if I go back to Excel and then choose to run the form, I'll find that I can't even click into these text boxes at all. If I type in a number here and choose one of my option buttons, the values come into the text box. You'll see that the numbers are slightly greyed out, but I can't even click into there to select the values. Okay, so that's one approach. The other option is to change the locked property instead. So I'm going to go back to the Visual Basic editor and select those three text boxes again. I'll change their enabled property back to true, but this time find the locked property and change that to true. So if I then go back to Excel and run the form again, I'll find this time I can click into the text boxes, but I can't type anything into them. So if I do type a number into the film gross text box and choose one of these option buttons, the values still appear. But the advantage here is that I can select, if I wanted to copy and paste this somewhere else, I can select the text and copy and paste it. So I could copy that and paste it somewhere else. Okay, so those are the two options, either locked or enabled. I think in this case I'm going to go with the locked option so that I can still copy and paste the values if I need to. The other slightly more important problem that we have to solve is if the user tries to exchange the currency without having typed anything into the text box in the first place. So I close the form down and then relaunch it. It starts with an empty text box, so essentially a zero-length string. If I try to exchange a zero-length string, then things fall over somewhat horribly. If I hit the debug button, the problem is multiplying an empty string against the value of the exchange rate, so 0.708, whatever it was in that case. So we want to make sure that that can't happen. I'm going to stop running through this procedure, and then we'll go back to the code behind the click events of these buttons, and then update our calculate exchange procedure to take that into account. There's a fairly simple solution to the problem, is just to use an if statement to check if the film gross text box has an empty string in it. So we can say, before we attempt to do anything, after the variable declaration, if film gross.value equals an empty string, then do something. So we'll have an end if statement there as well. So let's have a think, what could we do? Well, basically we want to make sure that we exit the subroutine, of course, so that the rest of this procedure doesn't just continue. We should probably also indicate to the user in some way that there's an issue. So in a similar approach to the way we approach validation in earlier videos in the series, we could say film gross dot back color equals RGB pink, the standard color we've been using. We could also say film gross label dot forecolor equals RGB red. And then at this point, if we were just to give this one a quick test, let's see what effect that has. If we go back and show the form and try to select an option button, we'll see that we don't get an error, and it clearly highlights that we haven't entered a value into the film gross. One small annoying thing is that it looks as though we have selected our exchange rate, so it seems silly to have that option button selected while it's not actually doing anything. So what we could do, the problem is, of course, if I do type a value into the film gross text box, then it doesn't then subsequently show any values, even though it looks as though that option has been selected. So what I'm also going to do is make sure that when we select one of these options with nothing typed into the text box, that it automatically deselects the option button, so it sets its value back to false. So I'm going to close that form down, head back to the Visual Basic editor, and again back to the same code behind the calculate exchange procedure. And what we will do is set the value of whatever option button has been passed in via this parameter, currency option, dot value equals false. So end result, if I go back to the form again and launch it and try to choose one of my option buttons, it will unselect the option basically, so it will set its value back to false while there's no value typed in. So as soon as I type in a valid number, I can choose one of these option buttons, and then everything works as it should. So there we go, a couple of simple examples really with using option buttons, but then option buttons are fairly simple anyway. That's how they work, so maybe you can find use for those in your own forms. Next couple of videos are going to go into some details on some of the other, again, fairly simple controls. I think we'll move on next to using spin buttons. So hopefully you'll join us for that one. See you next time. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the Wisel website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.